Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the weekly landscape update video that I do here in Raleigh, North Carolina, Zone 7B. For those of you who haven't been following along, there's a playlist on the channel called New House. And it's about a little over 2 years or so now that content's been going up into that playlist. And this place has really changed a lot. This front garden view that you're seeing right here definitely has changed this season. This fence was put up last year. You can go back and see how this was installed, and it's made a big difference here in being able to show off something on one side of it and on the other side of it. Just a good defining feature that's pretty easy to add as long as your neighborhood will let you, of course. There have been a lot of perennials added over the last couple of years, things that die to the ground and come back, herbaceous perennials. And then there's a lot of annuals out here as well. There'll be less annuals going forward as these perennials become more mature. There were also a lot of dwarf conifers added in the landscape, and I'm kind of going around right now and rescuing them because some of the annual things and some of the perennials that have become well established are starting to really force their way up against everything. And so that little green penguin pine there is something that, as an example of that. I just need to go in here and make sure I'm cutting back the perennials, giving some air movement around it, make sure they're not laying up against it, because this is temporary and that's permanent, and I don't want it damaged during the growing season. There's a clematis on the other end of the fence that bloomed quite well that was planted last fall, but there were also two others that were placed on the entryway here. They won't bloom until next year, but I am excited that I've gotten enough growth established on them now that they're holding on to the top up here. That means next year they're rooted out enough that they should be very aggressive coming out of the ground next year, and will cover a good portion of the front of the fence here and the back of the fence on this side of the entryway. The stone pathway is just stone sitting on the soil, and I'm allowing the zoysia grass to creep back in between the stones, and it's slowly but surely starting to fill in. And then there are annuals and perennials and shrubs, planted along one side of it, turf on the other, and they're just allowed to flop over in here a little bit so that it's just not an angular thing. I want as few angles in the landscape as possible, more curves. Houses are already angular, and driveways are angular, and sidewalks are angular. So as few angles as possible in the landscape is what I try to achieve. The Vinca everywhere is looking fantastic. You saw that in the first shot out at the street as well. And we were just talking about Steph and I were just talking about it's interesting, the old varieties of Vinca, just had terrible problems. They would just, they would grow for a little while and then get disease problems. These new varieties just go absolutely nuts. But one disappointing thing about them also that Steph brought up is there's very few pollinators on them. And so this being a pollinator garden, although this is quite beautiful, is not necessarily meeting the requirements for this landscape. And so they may be rethought about next year. But just in general, the new varieties of Vinca are just bulletproof. Honestly, you can see how great they look here and how great they looked out there. This nightlight Chamaecyparis continues to be just a standout in the landscape. That's a Southern Living Plant Collection piece. A lot of those conifers like this don't hold up well in our full sun heat here in the south, especially the gold conifers like this. It's got a teeny tiny amount of bleaching on the top from the sun being on it literally all day. But other than that, that thing is just absolutely perfect. And I haven't touched it. That's been in the ground probably almost as long as anything in this front garden space at this point, maybe a year and a half, has not been touched yet. And at some point I'll have to prune it because it's going to get a little bit bigger than I'd wanted. I want to keep it probably about this size, but man, that thing is just beautiful. This blueberry, this is a native blueberry. This is Rose's Blush. It has flowered this season. I showed it earlier in the season. All the new growth continues to have this kind of purplish hue to it during the season. Again, its size is going to have to be controlled here as well, but it gets the flowers, it gets fruit on it that the birds absolutely love. I've got other blueberries to eat in the landscape. These are also edible, but they're small, and they're really just here for the birds and the entertainment value and the beauty of this native blueberry. There's some LeAnn, Cleyera behind it that needs a little bit of control added to them. And the more pruning I do on that LeAnn, Cleyera, the more new growth it has during the season, and the new growth has this burgundy coloration to it that looks great. And the Radiance Abelia that's out here in the front garden has bloomed like mad for a month and a half now, and I'm about to do give it a little bit of a haircut, but it also looks this great. This little scene here has really come together during this growing season. This Indian hawthorn is called Rosalinda. A little different than the dwarf Indian hawthorns that most folks are used to. I do have a dwarf one over here as well that only gets 2.5 or 3 feet tall, 3 to 4 feet wide, new disease-resistant ones, because some of the older varieties of dwarf Indian hawthorns do have disease issues, but there are some newer ones coming that I'm pretty excited about. But this variety is called Rosalinda, has big, giant leaves on it, especially as it matures. This one's still a little bit small. This one can be tree formed, which is what I'm in the process of doing here. It's basically on a standard or single trunk. This one is marginal here. It's a zone 8 hardy, and again, I'm in zone 7B, kind of on the edge of 8 because we're near, in Raleigh in the city, a lot of asphalt around us. This one the reason I'm willing to take a risk with this one is because when it does flower, it has big, beautiful pink flowers that are super, super fragrant in big, large clusters. I covered it a few times this winter, especially that March 13th freeze that we had here where everything had kind of woken up a little bit, and then we had just a big wind and cold storm came through, and it was protected during that period of time. There is one at the J.C. Ralston Arboretum that is, I don't know, probably 20 feet tall, 15 to 20 feet tall to not exaggerate it, and just as wide. And it had no protection this winter, and it came into absolute full flower. So I think as this thing gets a little more mature, gets a little bit, all the parts of it get thicker and bigger, I won't have to worry about it during the winter time. But so I'm excited about this one. It just as it gets larger in the future, and again, big, beautiful foliage, great new coloration on the growth, kind of a reddish color on that, and then tremendous flowers for an Indian hawthorn. Down below it, and Holly's taking up residence here beside it. This is a Burning Love Leucothoe. I haven't given an update on it in a while. This is a part shade shrub, and it's got a little protection from the Indian hawthorn that's up above it. The new growth on this one all season is this bright red color, and then in the winter it turns a kind of a maroon color for the entire winter. Does flower, gets a little bell-shaped flower, just like a blueberry does. It's in that ericaceous. A lot of ericaceous plants have that similar bell-shaped flower on them. So flowers aren't particularly showy, but the plant is. This plant is always colorful in some way. So anytime it's growing, it's red. Anytime it's dormant, it's kind of maroon color. So great little compact addition to a part shade space. I put up a propagation video a couple of weeks ago, just showing an easy way to do some propagation. If you want to go back and take a look at that video, but it included this hydrangea, and it showed off this Roman candle Podocarpus, and people were like, "What is that? What is that? What is that?" And so, if you haven't seen this plant, this is a Podocarpus called Roman candle, and it has this white, almost white new growth on it that slowly but surely takes on some greener hues to it. And so it creates this two-tone look all season. It's just absolutely incredible showy plant. This is a very shady space that this is in. This is on the south side of the house, and so it will get some winter sun. But right now the sun's actually north of the house. This plant gets no direct sun on it. And look how showy it is. It's very, if you haven't grown a Podocarpus before, number one, this one's a slow growing variety. That white definitely slows it down. Green foliage or reddish new foliage, Podocarpus tend to grow pretty quickly. This again, very slow, but it grows very vertical. And so over time, it will become a 6 or probably 8 foot tall little cylinder, basically, in the space that it's in. It's going to take a few years for that to happen. Meanwhile, it's just a gorgeous, gorgeous plant. Another space that really has turned out nicely this spring is right here on the back of the screen porch. And the gold Weigela and the purple foliage Weigela that are on the right of the camera right now look great, and they're framing this little tree-formed encore azalea that I showed in last week's video. Somebody asked if I had limbed it up. No, I actually bought that one like that already. And you can find these early in the spring if you look. There are a lot of these tree-formed encores being grown. But it looks absolutely fantastic back there, and there's more flowers on it. I think there was only one open flower last week. Now there's about 5. I think next week, if I shot the thing again, it'd be almost in full flower. There's a David Viburnum in here. That Fatsia that I showed last week is up against the wall in the back. So I think all of these larger pieces in the back look great. And then there's some Pentas, some Angelonia, and a hybrid New Guinea impatient along the front border. There was a video put up on the channel a few months ago making this turf area in the back slightly smaller, and that gave me room to add these annuals along the edge of it. We were out of town for several weeks and had the containers all pulled together for somebody to water, but they've been put back on the porch back here. I think we did a container tour a couple of weeks ago and did not show off this container. This is a Boulevard Cypress, which is absolutely one of the favorite conifers in the landscape. It's soft to the touch, which is great. Most of these conifers in the landscape you're not going to grab a hold of like this. It looks great. This stained glasswork Coleus I don't think has been shown as well from the container videos, but I think this little piece over here looks really, really great right now. This is the other side, which has kind of a mirrored New Guinea impatient, Penta, Angelonia border along the side of it here, but that's the only thing that's mirrored. So you can take something and carry it over from one side to the other, but you don't have to take everything from one side to the other. Again, containers have been added back to the steps. In this area, there is a blue spruce, a dwarf one, that's right back here, just kind of waiting for it to grow. It's not the fastest growing thing here, and especially down here in the south where it's quite warm. But that was another thing that had to be rescued. Do walk around your landscape if you have a lot of kind of wild late summer growth, which can happen, and make sure there's nothing laying on the things that are really important to you. So again, annuals and ground covers were removed from it just recently. There's a palm in that container, and it's about to go in the ground. I put up a video this past week putting my my contorted Tomukiyama Japanese maple in the ground, and now that palm is next up to go into that space. And some of that ground cover sedum that's down below it is going to get some control added to it. Those sedum are just, gosh, they're so successful. Any kind of park shade, garden space, even the sun. I mean, those things are just wild. Almost any of these new sedum that are on the market can really take a lot of space very quickly, which is great for using less mulch and holding moisture in place and that kind of thing, but there's a limit to how much of it I actually want running through the garden. So it's going to have some control added at the same time that other maintenance is done. It's time to show off the Stellar Ruby Magnolia. This thing has really taken off this spring, and I have another channel called Garden Plants with Jim Putnam. Hadn't put up many videos on recently, but I did shoot a video with Stellar Ruby that's going to go up in the next few days on that channel. If you're not subscribed to that channel, I'll link it. I'll link it down below. But that video was shot I don't know, a couple of months ago. That's going up, and this thing was maybe this tall at that time, so it's put on a lot of growth. I love the fastigiate habit of this variety. Has fragrant flowers, great evergreen dark texture, just a great plant. The stems are kind of reddish on it. Just a great ornamental landscape plant. Hasn't been pruned at all, and you can see how tall and narrow it is. I think it ultimately will try to get wider than I want to have it here, but I'll just shear off the sides when that happens, and I'm going to let it get as tall as it wants to get. I'll probably limb it up a bit from the bottom in the future so I can underplant it. But other than that, what a great ornamental plant. Since I talked about the Angiostar Fatsia last week, the vining Fatsia English ivy mix, I figured I would show off the spider's web Fatsia. I think I showed it a month and a half ago or something, and it's put on a lot of growth since then. This was against everything I ever say on the channel about when to plant something that's marginal. I planted this in November, 2 Novembers ago, and it got badly damaged. Not badly damaged, but it did get damaged that winter. If you're planting something that's only zone 8 hardy and you're in zone 7, it doesn't matter. If you're pushing the boundaries of something, it's probably not best to plant that in the coldest time of the year or almost the coldest time of the year, but that's what I did. Thought it was in a protected enough area, but it got damaged. It's taken a year for it to really recover, and now it's putting on real growth. And so it'll be much more cold hardy going forward, and it's starting to pick up some of the coloration in the leaves that this spider's web variety is kind of famous for. These leaves will be whiter and whiter over the next few years, and the leaves will get larger and larger as well. It'll have leaves as wide as maybe 16 or 18 inches over time, and they'll eventually flower at some point. Sometimes it can take several years for these Fatsia varieties to flower, but the pollinators absolutely love the flowers on them. So that's it. That's a little glimpse of some of the things that are exciting here in the landscape again in Raleigh, North Carolina, and we'll be back next week with another update of the landscape. Thanks for watching.